Hello, anybody there?
Hello.
Hey, Jen, thanks so much for taking the time to chat with me today. I'm so excited to get to talk about your latest work and to learn a little bit more about your work and where you come from. So, if we may begin, could you tell me a little bit about where you're from? What's that world like?
I'm from California, and I'm back in California. I've been back for about 10 years, but I lived in many places. I spent a long time in Texas, and I lived in France and Russia at one point briefly. And so I grew up in the Bay Area in a blue collar family, and my parents probably taught me about storytelling without realizing it. My mom was the kind of person who she had lived in the same county all her life and knew everyone. She'd come home from any errand or from going to church or whatever, and she'd have a story.
Mm,
She wouldn't just gossip, and she wouldn't just talk about who she ran into, but she'd have a story with a beginning, middle, and end, kind of organically. And and my dad was the one who was responsible for taking me to see a lot of horror films when I was a child. and and maybe he shouldn't have done that. I think nowadays everyone would be scandalized, but I think he really helped me to embrace a passion and to watch visual stories on a screen.
yeah.
And yeah, he was doing the right thing.
So, can you remember when you started writing and what that kind of writing was like? What kind of stories were you trying to create if you were at that point?
When I was little or when I was
Yeah,
starting to
yeah.
be more
Did
serious?
did you have an inclination when you were younger that you were going to do this, or did that come later in life?
No, I definitely knew it. And they were scary stories, which is kind of funny. I was in seventh grade at Catholic school, and I wrote a story. And my teacher, who was a nun, we didn't have that many nuns, but she was one of the few who'd been there for so long. She taught one of my siblings, and I'm much younger than the other children in my family, so she
Mm.
knew us. And she was very, very impressed. And she read the story aloud. And she told me I was going to be a writer, but it was kind of like she cursed me. I don't I don't know if she realizes. I don't think she's even alive anymore, but I don't know if she realized what she was doing because she did kind of set me down the terrible, difficult path by making me feel like, oh, you have to do this. You just have to do this. You're so gifted. It's your natural talent. But of course, it was a long time before I was publishing work and
Hmm.
before I remembered that I wanted to do this. I think a lot of us go through a period where we feel like we have to grow up and get serious. And I think that
Hmm.
really threw me off the track.
Yeah, yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I feel like in my personal life, there's been so many times when I feel like I'm at the very edge of where I'm supposed to be, but then there's a whole bunch of setbacks and life kind of happening and throwing so many obstacles in many different directions. So it's great to hear that you've began a career in writing, and it seems like you've published several other works. Could you talk a little bit about those works and how they led up to this novel?
Um, I have only worked with small independent presses, which I think is also important because they'll
Hmm.
take a risk on you where the big five or whatever it is now, the big four, absolutely will not anymore. That's the way we all feel. I have written two novellas and a chapbook. One of the novellas is kind of well, everyone thinks it's autobiographical, but I don't think it is. It's made up, but it's very about a little girl very much like me in the Bay Area. The person I was just describing earlier would be the narrator of that novella. And then with The Kelping, which is the second novella I published, it becomes more surreal and horror based. And my chapbook is fairy tales. So they
Mm.
do all kind of lead up to this novel in their own way.
Yeah, yeah. So when did you begin writing Verushka, which I have to say before we get into it is a phenomenal work. I just finished it a couple of days ago, and I've still been sitting with sort of the lingering emotions of that experience because I love how compact it is. I mean, it's just a brilliant work that crams so much legacy and story into a very concise piece of work that it left me reeling from the beautiful nightmare that it was. So I just want to congratulate you on that before we go into the process of the work.
Thank you so much. It makes me feel really good to know that. and that it was emotionally resonant,
Yeah, yeah,
and that you
and
didn't
a
mind it
blast.
being so intense and compact. That's kind of the way I kind of the way I roll. And was there a question? I'm just kind of
Yeah,
basking in your
yeah.
phrase.
No, no, absolutely. I think what I wanted to ask you initially was how long has this been working its way within your writing? When did you get a glimpse of Verushka and what it could be?
Um, I want to say that it's such a work from my unconscious that it surely must have been there from the very beginning without me quite understanding. I feel like it unifies a lot of strands of my life and my work. I literally began it during quarantine,
Mm,
and I'm not sure at what point I realized you're writing a novel, but I think it had something to do with, well, those opening chapters when you're out in Topanga with the little family.
hmm.
I was finding my anchor in the kind of dark and precarious world of the little girl's consciousness. And that was where I really wanted to be. And then I realized that the telling and I wanted it to be, I mean, it is coming of age, but I wanted it to be a family novel. So I realized this is very much a good project for a multi-perspective novel. I
Hmm.
love multiple POV to read it and to write it. And I thought, okay, other people in this family need to get in there and tell their story, tell their experience. We'll see that they've all run into the villain or somebody close to her at some point or another.
Yeah, and I think that that's one of the major victories of the story is how elegantly you were able to piece the revelations of the family into just these very discreet, very just again compact and well written. And somebody mentioned stark in the writing, and I feel like there's something happening there in terms of your influences that I'd like to talk a little bit about. But I just really enjoyed how you took your time with it. And you may have mentioned in here, I believe it was the interview you did with Luna Station, where you
Yes.
were talking about how the different characters should carry the weight of the story in some respects. Could you elaborate a little bit on that? Because it's such an interesting way of looking at it.
I think this happens with all family histories, whether they're written down or not, whether they're fictional or true. I don't even know if you can produce a true family history because everyone in the family has a different version of the story. It fascinates me that you can be in the same room at the same wedding and be having a different experience, from your siblings or your
Yes.
parents. People will start screaming at each other. That's not what happened. That's not what I said. I was there. I remember this. It's seared in my brain. So I think that's kind of wonderful. The chaos from shared emotional memory. It seems both challenging and potentially very crazy making to try to write it down as a literary work, but I was thinking I couldn't it's hard for me to come up with other examples, but, Faulkner, for instance, The Sound
Mm,
and the Fury
uh-huh.
is told that way, and that's a great example, I think, of different people pitching in, even though he's much more, elegant than I am and much more accomplished. Really can't see having it any other way, though, when you're talking about a family. I feel like everyone has to have their say, as they do in real life.
Yeah, and
Or if they
oh,
refuse to have their say, the children are often forced to make it up, if you know what I'm saying.
yeah,
If parents won't answer questions.
and that certainly acts as impetus for the for one of our protagonists to move forward. And I mean I don't really want to talk too much about the character machinations because I feel like I might give something away, and this is just
Yes.
so elegant the way you revealed it that I really hope that the reader can experience that the way that I did. But just to kind of dovetail a little bit into the influences because that was very resonant with me. I love the way that you described your influences in from fairy tales, and you'll have to correct
Yes.
me if I'm wrong. Uh, about the earthenness of
Ye-
those works, using those stories as sort of a jumping
yes.
point for the work that you created here.
Yes. I think I was thinking of one fairy tale from a Russian fairy tale with Vasilisa the Wise and Baba Yaga. You're familiar with the witch Baba Yaga, the one
Yes,
who
a
has the
little
hut.
bit.
Yeah, she's an international sensation. So she started in Russia, but everyone writes about her, and I think everyone is afraid of her. And that is set. I mean, Vasilisa becomes a nobleman's wife, but that is set pretty much in the forest, in the dark. And I like the fairy tales from Russia and the Grimm's tales as well, because they are earthy, as opposed to and I've said this in other interviews and probably at cocktail parties before, so if anybody out there is listening, I apologize, but I kind of prefer them to the tales of the French court, which are very much of the court, of the city, focused
Hmm.
on balls and ball gowns and finery and wealth. And it's important to that society to talk about how much people own. And this is a little different. This is people close to the earth walking along the dirt in the dark with very little to help them except for their instincts and occasional maybe help from animals or from talismans or some good advice that somebody in your family might have given you. And I feel like that's what I mean by being anchored to the child's consciousness in the beginning of the book, because she doesn't really know what she's doing or where she's going. She's little. She's still learning English. She's so small, and
Hmm.
very much the feeling of grasping in a void at times and making sense of things for the very first time.
And so, speaking specifically about Devon, because I feel like she is our way in to that
Mhm.
childlike wonder of the entire piece. What is it that led you to really understand where that character was coming from when you wrote it? Because obviously there's drafts and rewrites, and you're writing things out to figure out what this thing is going to be. But what were some anchors of clarity for her character to you that came to you?
Okay, so first of all, I keep saying the word unconscious, and I don't know if that's very helpful.
That's
I want
great.
to give some credit to Kathy Fish, who I've studied with for flash fiction, because she was always encouraging us to trust the unconscious and kind of trying to return us there when we were hard up for inspiration or even
Mm,
subject matter. And I think that in general, as a writer, I realize that's all you have, really. Like, you can go out and do a bunch of research, and you can take notes, and you can draft and draft and draft, and you can get into a great MFA program and have great beta readers, but it all comes, if you want originality, and we're very concerned with that these days, right? Lately with AI and so forth.
yeah.
If you want that, you need to return to the unconscious. And so that sounds straightforward, but it's actually a huge mystery.
Hmm.
And how you choose language to write about it is a big challenge. And I was trying to both convey Devon's experience in language that you could plausibly think, oh, that a child would think that, a child would say that. But at the same time, I wanted to reflect the terror of her parents watching this and not
Hmm.
knowing what's going on or how to get in there, or
Yeah.
is someone else influencing her? And and from my own parenting experiences, I love how your kids can scare you. Like, when you hear them talking to someone in their room and there's nobody else there, and that can be delightful, and it can also be terrifying. And they might, and oh, there's so many things they can't tell you yet because they don't have the language for it. And you can
Hmm.
ask and ask, and they won't be able to elucidate. And that's kind of like the wonder and the horror of being a mom or a
Right.
dad.
And it's so interesting because it is a natural thing for a child to have those tendencies, but then as we get older, we start losing those things, right? And then it's almost like we lose that language to communicate with our children. And
Hmm.
one of the things that terrified me about this book, in the best possible way, is that it really confronted me with some of my fears about parenting, especially when you get to the point where the child is going through a monumental part of their life, which is going through, I guess, puberty, becoming, an adult, and having these kinds of intense experiences, and just feeling completely helpless and at the mercy of something that is greater than you in a sense, and disconnecting you from your child. But then again, that could be self-inflicted, and I think you did that so well when it came to Devon's mother, and just putting her in that situation, I just felt so bad, but I completely empathized with her.
Oh, good. Yeah. I mean, I get tired of Caroline sometimes, but especially having to reread her sections, because she reminds me the most of myself, I guess, of most of all the characters.
But
Yeah.
yeah, but there's some beautiful moments that happen in those exchanges, and I think in the act of preserving that innocence, or fighting for that innocence, Devon becomes, I mean, the revelation in so many ways, and I don't know that I can elaborate any more than that. Um,
Yeah, it's a lot of talking around that we have to do.
yeah, yeah, but let's talk about the magic of stuffed animals then, if we could, for just a moment, if that's okay.
Yeah,
Um,
that's always good. I've
s-
got one of them with me right now.
yeah, yeah, I heard that Henry actually exists, and for those who are listening, Henry is a character that is featured in this story. And if you could tell me a little bit about Henry and where he comes from.
In real life or in the book?
A little bit of both, just so that we can
he
let the
yeah,
listener know.
he is a stuffed animal that belongs to one of my kids, and not exactly sure how he got chosen to be in this responsible role. I think perhaps because he's so quiet. And I was trying to imagine, children love their toys, they love their animals, and they make them come to life. And but what if one of them was maybe not such a big help to you, or if he was easily influenced by outside forces? And Henry definitely fell into that role. But then at the same time, we have Bear. I don't know if you want to introduce Bear.
Yeah,
He does.
let's.
Yeah, he doesn't. I don't have a bear. He was just the kind of bear, the classic teddy bear with the movable joints that we've all seen. Kind of. I don't know if they came from Victorian times, but and he's the responsible one, and he's the one who's going to help Devon when she needs it. Um, and if it seems silly or strange to have stuffed animals who are characters who have a big role to play in a novel, I realize that that also comes from fairy tales. The idea of talking animals or active animals with agency or importance or magic, that definitely comes from the fairy tales. And
Mhm.
I don't know if you were listening to the talk that Orion magazine had recently with Kate Bernheimer and Amy Bender
I don't believe so,
and
no.
Kelly Link and Carmen Maria Machado, and it was about fairy tales and climate change, because
Oh,
there's a new issue of Orion that takes that as its topic. And one of them mentioned, like, if you're a fairy tale writer, you take animals very seriously and they get a huge upgrade in your work. And I felt so validated because I don't know how this is an adult novel. It's literary horror, I guess you call it. And I don't know how people are going to receive Henry and Bear
Mm.
and understand their importance, not just in a child's imagination, but as characters
Right.
with agency.
But it speaks to the challenge of the genre and the forms, right? I feel that you do a really lovely job of defying expectations in the best possible way, because in this form you wouldn't associate the stuffed animals, but at the same time they fit so wonderfully in this narrative. They make sense and they make the world come alive and lend more credence to that point of view of wonder and innocence that is about to become something else. And I think that's what I loved about this so much, is that interaction, and especially Devon's conversations with her comrades there about
Yes.
trying to figure out a way out of this conundrum that they find themselves in.
Yes.
But
Well, because in their characters, I mean, even dolls, stuffed animals, they're characters. For a while there, whether if you're destined to become a writer, it's probably your first time to practice dialogue when you're a little kid playing with your toys.
mm,
But they're already characters in their own right.
right.
That's why imaginative play is supposed to be so important, I guess, and why we encourage them to do that instead of looking at screens or television.
Yeah, and it leads me to this other point that you had mentioned in the past about the types of stories that we tell to our younger generations. There's a podcast I believe you did a little while back where you mentioned this, and I was curious if you could give me a little bit of that perspective. Are we are we too overzealous to censor sort of what kids are able to consume, or is that, is there an issue there these days that that maybe storytelling can alleviate?
This is a great question, and I think I'm still working it out in my mind as a writer and as a mom. My kids are grown now, but
Mm.
so I've been through it all, or I'm in the home stretch, I guess. So one side of me wants to scream, "Yes, we censor too much. This is ridiculous. We're holding them back. They're not learning anything. You're treating them like they're idiots or like they're cowardly." And then another side of me knows that because of the internet which is a new phenomenon, which is
Mm.
very strange, that kids are up against a danger that we've never seen before. And I do take that very seriously, um, because of especially because of the strange anonymity on the internet. How people can be hidden doing
Hmm.
strange things, and they can have a lot of influence over the young
Yeah.
or the old, as we've seen. I
Oh yeah.
Yeah, over everyone. However, it kind of breaks my heart every time I hear about a book being forbidden, or from being, well, not just the recent incredible movement to ban everything, which is not a serious thing. It's like, I don't think they're not really talking about literature. They're talking about ideology and control. But
Hmm.
I just kind of, I'm really skeptical that books are terribly, this idea that books are terribly, terribly dangerous for children. My parents, one thing we started off by talking about them, right? But they
Hmm.
never took a book away from me. Um, they never they never censored my reading, and I don't really think I was damaged by the things I read. And also, something like a fairy tale can be plenty violent and scary, in the original forms.
Right.
They really were, and they weren't necessarily for children either. They were kind of cautionary tales for adults a lot of the time, or commentaries, social commentaries.
Right.
Um,
And it would
so I
be,
guess I'm.
yeah, go
Mhm.
ahead.
Oh, I'm not answering your question, or I'm answering it two ways, but I think they're both true. I think you should be worried about the internet, but I don't think you should be worried about books, if it's okay to say that. I
Yeah.
think you should be delighted if you have a child who is curious enough to read a so-called forbidden book, and maybe you should
Hmm.
read it together. I know
Yeah.
there are some things that are too explicit or unnecessary, but I also know if somebody had held me back, it would have killed me, because I was at a certain point there, I was on a mission
Right.
and I couldn't be held back.
Yeah, and I do agree with you because I'm torn on this sometimes, and my son is 10 years old, so he's getting to that age where things are
Yeah.
are really starting to
Yeah,
transform his
it's
world.
just about to hit you.
Exactly, exactly. I think that's why this book hit me in a particular way that made me
Mhm.
appreciate it a lot more. But I do feel that we're not afraid of the books. We're afraid of the conversation that we have to have about the books. And
Yeah.
I think we parents have to take ownership of that. We have to embrace the responsibility to actually tackle these issues with our family, with our children, and actually speak out in the open, which I have to say, and I apologize if I get too personal on this, but I was raised Catholic. A
Me
lot of
too.
my experiences, yeah, and I bring it up because I had heard you mention that. A lot of my experiences growing up were not positive ones in that environment. And
Mhm.
so that left me with a lot of concerns about the way that I talk to my son about these things, and
Mhm.
especially taboo things. And I think what I love about your book is that you're so honest and open, and there is fear in these characters, but there's also love and a desire to do the right thing. Which is very, like, I don't know, it feels like I'm trying to condense the importance of fairy tales and how we need to bring them back because they're
Yes,
such a
in their
vessel.
true form. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, they're an absolute vessel for the things that we're talking about right now. But there's totally not a question there. I just want to commend you because I think you're
Oh,
you're onto something here with the way that you are using this form to educate us a little bit, or even remind us just a little bit that this is important.
yeah. And
Yeah.
I also think that in the book, and in life, it's not that people are trying to keep secrets or information from you. Sometimes you're just missing each other. And a lot of these
Hmm. Yeah.
characters, that happens to them. Like, I'm sure that you felt frustrated at times, wanted to scream at them, like, "Don't you see what's happening? Don't you realize this? How can you?" And I think that definitely happens to you as a parent all the time. I'm sure you've noticed. And
Uh-huh.
in families, like, so you might not realize somebody needs your story, um, or they might not realize to ask you for it until after you're dead. I've heard that so many times, haven't you,
Oh,
from people
yeah.
whose parents and grandparents have passed? Oh my God, I wish I could ask them this. I didn't know. I wish I'd asked. I wish I'd asked. A lot of times it's not that we're trying to censor, but we just don't realize it's relevant to someone.
Yeah. And that was a really clever way that you were able to package that into the tension of the book, because the way you broke it up, the way that you had that information, it's a very sort of dramatic irony of the whole story that the audience had that information just a little bit in some moments before the actual character did, and that was just so delightful. I mean, coming from the theater, that's really what I enjoy, is like
I know. I
knowing
was
that
just
you're on
about
the yeah, on the edge of it.
Yeah, I know, and I told you we wouldn't talk about my academic background, but I did do my dissertation on a playwright. So yeah,
Oh,
that's
there you
definitely
go.
it's coming from that influence for sure. Just that whole thing about put them on the stage at the same time and turn them around and see if they can figure it out, you know?
Oh, I love
And
that.
they can't always do it.
So if I may ask just one question about playwrights, okay? Who was a playwright?
Ostrovsky was a 19th century Russian playwright.
Oh, lovely.
And I was interested in his idea of creating a national theater, and he definitely returned to traditional stories.
Mm.
Yeah.
Were you left with a feeling that those kinds of philosophies could be relevant right now in this day and age in our country?
Ah.
Just
Another.
as a playwright,
I love how
last one.
every question is loaded in this time that we're living
I'm
in.
so sorry.
No, it's not your fault. It's supposed to be exciting, but it also fills me with dread and fear.
Yeah.
I think that everyone is searching for that in a way, a kind of a purpose or some kind of representation that they feel is unifying. But I think that people fail to make it collaborative. I think there's too many people who want to just take it over and tell everyone else, okay, this is what we're doing now. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Or
Yeah.
um, in a way, the current disaster of the Supreme Court is kind of an example of a horrible overwriting, and it comes from one viewpoint, and
Yeah.
it turns
Yeah.
out to be minority rule in the end.
Right.
I'm
Right.
sorry, I know you didn't want me to.
No, but it's
Or
perfect, because I mean I completely agree with you. I think it's the curse of the pursuit of American exceptionalism in many
Mhm.
respects, where we refuse to seek the collective, and
Exactly, and maybe
it's
it's time for a new national literature that does that, and the
yeah.
diversity angle is probably the way to that. You know.
Uh-huh. Right. And I mean, I know that we're wading into completely different territory, but I want to I want to be
That's all
mindful of
right.
your time and ask you a couple more questions
Sure.
about sort of the book and
Hmm.
where you're coming from with it, because clearly this is something that came from within, from the deep unconscious. And I wanted to ask you if there was an exercise in particular or a writing method that awakened that for you, because I think a lot of us are distracted. We're working full-time jobs or doing other things, and it's difficult to kind of be one with that unconscious, or reach deep down for that sort of material. So has there been something that worked for you when you were
Yeah,
in a
and
bind?
for this book, I don't know if I've been able to recreate it, but I know it was quarantine and we were locked down,
Mm-hmm.
and we have four people living in a not too huge apartment, and
Mm-hmm.
I would wake up very early, and when it was still barely light, and before I doing anything else, maybe I got my coffee, but I didn't talk to anyone. I didn't open my phone. I didn't look at anything. I would sit down, open the document, and write at least 1,000 words for a long stretch of time. I started my days that way, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure it kind of kept me from straying too far from the unconscious mind, especially the way you are when you first wake up, before you
Yeah.
first fully wake up, which can be kind of a blessing, I think, before you kick into the panic of the daily life. Um,
Unless you're like
I know
me and
that's
you
helpful.
you wake up completely panicked. I open my eyes and I'm already panicking about something. But
Right, you don't
but
trying to figure
I
out what day it is and what does that mean. Yeah.
right, right. But I do appreciate that, because I think the habits of the work are the thing that will allow you to go a little bit deeper. And,
Hmm.
for me personally, I think it's a wonderful reminder as well. But as you were writing Verushka and as you were putting it together, what was the biggest hardship? If we could talk about the technical aspect of this coming together, what was the thing that really broke your confidence in the work, if there was a moment like that?
I don't know if it broke my confidence, but this was mostly close third from different characters. And before I had written a lot of first person, so I had to go from I had abandoned that idea of the first person voice that's going to take care of everything. I just
Uh-huh.
you're going to
Yeah.
be inhabiting the consciousness of different characters, and you can be really close in there, but you're going to have to be thinking of a different experience, a different person with each chapter, and they're all set in different years, or not all of them, but
Right.
just about, and different cities, and that was both more challenging and an easier way to try to inhabit a brand new person each time, if
Right.
that makes sense.
Yeah, because there's through lines, I'm sure, that allowed you to keep those things continuous, even though it was somewhat fragmented in terms of who was delivering the information and the types of conflicts that they were going through. But in terms of the setting of these chapters, these sections, was there difficulty going back to the periods that you were writing in? Was there a conscious sort of research that you were worried about of capturing those time periods in the right context for the story?
Um, I felt more confident, or maybe just more fond of some chapters than others. I really like the grandmother's chapter
Yeah.
in San Francisco,
Oh, that was great.
uh, yeah, and I actually felt surprisingly at ease in Verushka's forest. I'm not sure why, but
Hmm.
long training in fairy tales, I guess. Um, I This is when you really need your beta readers. Like I had Laurie Samble Brody, who's a flash writer, primarily looking at the Topanga chapter very carefully, and she gave it her approval, and she also gave me information. Like she knew which library had a story time during that time period because she
Oh,
was living out
wow.
there. And I was like, oh, authenticity. It was so reassuring because you really don't think you're doing the right thing. Like, you're so worried you might make a mistake if it's real world based. And so you just
Right.
have to kind of take your time and ask for help, and keep your notes. And
So working with Kathy Fish, who I learned recently has a phenomenal Substack, and I've been trying to read hers, and Tommy Dean, who was like those two have been sort of my very recent. I mean, I'm very new to fiction, but
okay.
they have been pretty instrumental in the way that I start to see Flash as so viable and immediate and just powerful. I mean, I've
Yeah.
kind of always believed in that in terms of
Hmm.
like a writing creative mantra or whatever. But I do think that community and finding those people that you trust is so important. And I'm curious if you could elaborate a little bit on how you were able to make those connections with Kathy and the folks that were your readers for this work.
Yeah. They actually came out of one of Kathy's classes, and I think there are many people who have little groups of people they met in Kathy's classes. She is
Mhm.
a huge connector and community leader for us, whether you write Flash or decide to write other things. I think
Mhm.
everyone knows her importance. So that's who my beta readers were, and at least two of them are here in LA, and the other two are back east that I used. And years ago we met in the I call it the before times, pre-Trump and so forth.
Yeah.
Years ago we met in that context, and they were gracious enough to read a longer work from me. That's another thing, you feel like you're really imposing on people when you drop a novel of any length
Mm,
on them.
yeah.
People can get so busy that even dropping a piece of Flash is too much. So I you need to take a lot of time and be patient.
Hmm. And that takes a lot of trust, I imagine,
Yeah.
to be comfortable with those folks. But it seems like you have a good group that believes in you as a storyteller and in the work that you're putting out. But were they tough on you? That were they able to, was there enough clarity there that they could
Oh,
yeah.
yeah, we're all tough on each other, and I knew they would be. And you just have to sit with it. Not everything that they say you're going to change or whatever. I mean, everyone's going to have such wildly different reactions, and you have to go with your gut, I guess, but also
Yeah.
learn when they're right, when they criticize something you've done or something that they don't find as plausible. And the older I get and the more experience I get, I think you should just choose readers who are really hard on you.
Mm, yeah.
Don't choose your mom or your spouse unless that person is in fact incredibly demanding and critical.
Yeah.
Although interestingly, my husband did get really involved in reading this book in the later stages, and now he's one of the big champions.
Oh, that's
Um,
wonderful to hear.
hmm
Yeah.
But yeah, you should have somebody in your group that you're a little bit afraid of
Uh-huh.
reading your work, because if you think this is scary now, it's going to get a lot scarier later.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, speaking of later, when you were shopping this around and trying to figure out where it was going to go, how did you land at your publisher, and what was that process like?
I had done the agent thing. I think I'll always go out there and try and see if I can lure one of them. And I get closer each time, but never representation. And I don't want any of the listeners to be discouraged by that. Like, it just could mean could mean it's not your time or it's better to go with an independent press. I
Yeah.
had seen different people's books coming out of Journal Stone, books that I really admired. Like Maria Haskins published with them, and Gwendolyn Keist, who wrote one of my blurbs. And so
Mhm.
I thought, oh, if there was a press I really wanted to get in with, it would be this one.
Mhm.
That was delightful that worked out.
And so did that
And
take a
I
long
had to
time?
wait. Sorry. Well, I had to wait for them to have an open reading period. And then I
Mm.
had to wait a long time for them to respond. So yeah, all that takes forever, which is why it's probably good to have multiple projects going on if you
Yeah.
have that kind of time.
Right. So are you going into more long form fiction right now? Like, say, after you finish Verushka, what was the next thing that you decided to pick up while you were waiting?
I craved short stories, but not necessarily flash, more like up to 3,000, the 3 to 5,000 range. So
Mm.
more traditional length short story, which I feel is one of the hardest forms there is. It's
Mm.
like some kind of little puzzle that is
Yeah.
difficult every time. So I wanted to go back to that. And right now well, when the dust settles more, because it's really hard to write while you're promoting, but
Yeah.
I have one short story and the beginnings of one novel that I'm working on.
So you're
It's
going back into novel form.
well, eventually. I mean, I'm in the very early stages, so and I'm not able to sit down and do that thing where it feels like the world is dark and quiet currently for some reason. So,
Oh yeah.
that method I just talked to you about, I don't know if it'll always be the working method for me.
Right. Right.
Um, but it feels good to have a novel that I'm thinking about and a story that I'm working on
Right.
to go
Right.
back and forth between the two forms.
And just to clarify here, the novel is coming out just this week. So we're actually going to have this episode up this week for us to celebrate the
Oh, wonderful.
release. Yeah, I'm really excited about that, and I can't wait to make a little bit of noise for the release. I think it's just such a wonderful work, and I'm really excited for the world to check it out. But just a couple more questions here,
Sure.
just to be mindful, because I know it's a weekday and it's so random, and I
I
appreciate
keep
your
thinking it's
time.
Sunday because of the fourth was yesterday.
Right, right. I had a long weekend, and so I'm a little disoriented. So I thank you for your patience. So now that the story is about to come out into the world, can you just sit with me in the moment when you finish this work, and what was your immediate response to Verushka and the world that had been built when you finally saw it as something that was cohesive, that could run and had legs?
hmm When did that happen, you mean? Or
Yeah,
what did it
yeah.
feel like?
Yeah, the feeling. I mean, I'm all into the feeling because clearly this has been a long time coming, and there's a reward. There's a feeling, at the end of that long race.
I don't know if there's a moment that stays still like that, because what ends up happening is that you have to reread it so many times to the point where you almost feel like you're killing it and yourself. But knowing that there's a rhythm to it, like I think I would always reread it the same way, like put it down at the same points and come back to it, because I couldn't do it in one day, because some of this is line editing, so you have to be super vigilant. And feeling like, oh, I know Elaine is coming, and I know I can go back to San Francisco, and I'm going to be really happy in that chapter. Or, oh, we're at the forest finally, and this is what I've been waiting for my whole life. Like, I think forcing yourself to live through the experience of it over and over again convinces you that it has legs, as you say,
Mm,
if that makes sense. Because there's
yeah.
not a moment. I think movies about novelists and writers make you think that there are moments where it all changes for you, but in life, I don't think that's true.
Oh, I
Especially
love that.
now, since a book deal won't help you at all.
Right.
It's process.
So, what is it that we need to be looking for when? I guess let me phrase it this way. What do you think the audience should be taking away from Verushka in terms of female empowerment being seen as a potentially destructive force? And I don't know if I'm phrasing this the right way, but I just think there's something so powerful at the core of Verushka, the work and the character, that speaks to
hmm
a kind of duality that is abused by our society, in which we see female empowerment as a bad thing.
Yeah, I know. And it's hard to talk about it without
Yeah,
giving
exactly.
away the
Yeah.
ending.
And I apologize if
Um,
I may have spoken too much on it
no,
already.
I apologize if I have written too much. I guess I know what you mean. Like, she's kind of wonderful and horrifying at the same time. So I think if you're looking for a good villain, I think I can give you that. I think that maybe the answer to your question is not in Verushka herself, but in Devon and Verushka. You see, because I
Yeah.
have a hard time at times choosing a hero for the novel. I know it's Devon. She takes over and she puts things right, or she tries to, but um, I mean, it is called Verushka, right? It's the title of the book, and her face is on the cover, and she's the vibe of the book launch and everything.
Mm.
I maybe this is a way of having it both ways.
Uh-huh.
Having it both ways, because it's such a responsibility when you write about an evil person, isn't it?
Absolutely.
The temptation to let her take over everything was tremendous. And
But I do believe that was the mark of a brilliant antagonist, a brilliant bad personality coming to try to take over as they're meant to do. And lastly, before we wrap up, I just I was curious if there is a couple of things that you might want to share for those who are just starting out, in particular in this genre that you love so much, that you write in, that might be useful for younger folks who are looking to get started in these types of stories.
for one thing, I would say embrace your monster and let them do everything that they possibly can before you decide what you're going to do with them, or what you want them to, what you want to do with them. I mean, and if that's your hero, I think it might be, well, I don't know. I think people are hungry always for good villains. I think that they love them. Readers and viewers love them.
Hmm.
Um, I think you should let them be evil. I think we have a lot of evil in our world, and sometimes it's easier to deal with it in this form than in the form that you and I both know is out there, and that we worry about all the time for our
Hmm.
children and our future in general, and for the planet. For female characters or people living in a female body, I feel like there's so much body horror that comes with being in a female body. It's just naturally there, and that was always inspirational to me, both in life and in art. I never wanted to shy away from it. And that's just such a natural part of the horror of existence. Although I don't know if everybody wants to write about that, but so I think that's why I often return to the young teenage
Hmm.
girl and her issues and her experiences.
Well, I got to say, that's probably one of my favorite things that's ever been said on this podcast. I think that you really epitomize the beauty of the horror genre and its possibility with this work that you've put together. And I think that's a beautiful note to end on. And Jan, I can't thank you enough for your patience with me as we tried to get this thing scheduled, and your brilliant work that tries to explore so much and does a tremendous job of illuminating the world that we live in through like the most horrific, amazing means, and for your time, because this was amazing. And again, congrats on this work. I absolutely loved it, and I'm probably going to be checking it out again here in the near future once I digest it.
Thank you so much for your support and your praise. It means a lot to me. It really does.
Well, it was an awesome time, and I hope that the launch goes well. This will be going live real soon, and yeah, let's stay in touch. I'd love to chat again down the road, and keep me
Oh,
posted
yes.
because I'll be around.
Okay, I will too.
Well,
Thank you very, very much.
yeah, thanks again, Jen, and you take care. Talk soon.
You too. Bye.
Bye.